Okay, we'll start with the Mangala Charan. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namah Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Datati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udapadakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamsya Sri Rupam Sagarjatam Sagana Raghunathan Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यः च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. Today we'll continue with verse 18 from the 12th chapter, Canto 1. So it is, this part is related to the conversation between the Brahmanas who are assembled to conduct the birth ceremony of Maharaj Parikshit, and there's this conversation going on between the Brahmanas and Maharaj Yudhishthira. So they were all describing about the future predictions based on Maharaj Parikshit's astrological chart, and Yudhishthira was also conversing with those Brahmanas about Maharaj Parikshit. So they, in the previous verses, they were explaining to the Brahmanas were explaining to Yudhishthira that Maharaj Parikshit would grow up to be as glorious, not even greater than his ancestors. Like especially there were comparisons with uh, the father of Yudhishthira himself. So it was already predicted that he would not only grow up as a great devotee, as a Mahabhagavata, but Maharaj Parikshit will also grow up um, to even add to the glory of the entire lineage of the Pandava dynasty. So in this verse, Yudhishthira Maharaj is responding to what was told by the Brahmanas. Sri Raja Uvacha Apesha Vamsyan Rajalshin Punya Shlokan Mahatmanaha Anuvartita Svidyasasha Sadhuvadena Sattamaha Sri Raja Uvacha Apesha Vamsyan Rajalshin Punya Shlokan Mahatmanaha Anuvartita Svidyasasha Sadhuvadena Sattamaha Sri Raja Uvacha Apesha Vamsyan Rajalshin Punya Shlokan Mahatmanaha Anuvartita Svidyasasha साधुवादेन सत्तमः श्रीराजोवाच अपेष वंश्यान् राजर्षीन् पुण्यश्लोकान् महात्मनः अनुवर्तितस्विद्यशसा साधुवादेन सत्तमः श्रीराजोवाच अपेष वंश्यान् राजर्षीन् पुण्यश्लोकान् महात्मनः अनुवर्तितस्विद्यशसा साधुवादेन सत्तमः. Okay, who wants to recite?
Can I try, Prabhu?
Okay, Prabhu.
Sri Rajovacha Api Esa Vamsyam Rajasin Punya Slokam Mahatmanaha Anuvartida Swit Yasasa Sadhu Adena Satama.
Okay, nice. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank
Next.
you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, shall I try?
Sure.
श्रीराजोवाच अभि ईश वंशन् राजश्रीन् पुण्यश्लोकन् महात्माना अनुवर्तिता श्वदित्यायशश साधुवदर सत्तमा.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. Next.
So I try.
Okay. Yeah.
Sri Rajavacha Api Esa Vamsaya Rajasin Punya Sloka Mahatmana Anuvartita Suyasasa Sadhu Vadena Sattama. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. Who else? Okay, we'll proceed with the synonyms. Sri Raja Uvacha Apesha Vamsyan Rajalshin Punya Shlokan Mahatmanaha Anuvartita Svit Yasasha Sadhu Vadena Sattamaha. Sri Raja, the all good king, Maharaj Yudhishthira, Uvacha said, Api, whether, Esha, this, Vamsyan, family, Rajalshin, of saintly kings, Punya Shlokan, pious by the very name, Mahatmanaha, all great souls, Anuvartita, follower, sweet will it be, Yashasa, by achievements, Sadhu Vadena, by glorification, Sattamaha, O great souls. Translation, the good king Yudhishthira inquired, O great souls, will he become as saintly a king as pious in his very name, and as famous and glorified in his achievements as others who appeared in this great royal family? So in the previous verse, verse 17, the Brahmanas were explaining that Maharaj Parikshit will grow up to be a Mahabhagavata, and he was also described as Vishnu Ratha because Maharaj Parikshit was especially protected by Lord Vishnu himself, as he was saved, as we have studied in this chapter and also in the few chapters before that, about how Lord Krishna saved Maharaj Parikshit by entering into the womb of Uttara. So he revived Maharaj Parikshit by taking the 400 Vishnu form, and the size was the size of that expansion was as big as the size of a thumb. So Maharaj Parikshit was also able to get a glimpse of the Vishnu form when he was revived in his mother's womb. So the Brahmanas were explaining to Maharaj Yudhishthira that since he was especially protected by Lord Vishnu himself since birth, so he will grow up to be a Mahabhagavata. And now Yudhishthira Maharaj, he is also curious to know whether he will also grow up to be a saintly king. As we know, the Pandavas, they were all belonging to the Kshatriya Varna. So the Pandava dynasty, they were all engaged in the business of administration. So Maharaj Parikshit was especially saved by Lord Krishna, mainly so that he could continue the reign of the Pandavas. The Pandavas were assisted by Lord Krishna himself to win against the demoniac Kauravas, and it was all due to the will of the Supreme Lord himself that the Pandavas should rule, and therefore the war happened so that the Supreme Lord could eliminate the burden of the earth. So after eliminating the demoniac Kauravas, the administration of Hastinapura was handed over to the pious Pandavas, and it was all due to the supreme will of the Supreme Lord. And since the immediate next generation of the Pandavas were all killed during the war, whether it was Abhimanyu or the sons of Draupadi. So since they were all killed, Lord Krishna especially saved Maharaj Parikshit so that he could take over from Maharaj Yudhishthira and continue the reign of the Pandavas. So based on the description of the Brahmanas, they already mentioned that since Maharaj Parikshit was especially saved by Lord Vishnu himself, and they described him as Vishnu Ratha, so he will grow up to be a Mahabhagavata. So apart from being the heir apparent, Maharaj Parikshit had already attained a glorious position, and as a Mahabhagavata, there were also descriptions in the previous verse about how in every family, the biggest service a devotee could do for his family members is by himself or herself to be a good devotee. By being a good devotee, even the family members for generations will become qualified for liberation. So these descriptions were mentioned in the purport of the previous verse, but that was the spiritual aspect about Maharaj Parikshit. Now, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he is curious to know about how will he be able to continue the glorious reign of the Pandava dynasty. Purport: the forefathers of King Yudhishthira were all great saintly kings, pious and glorified by their great achievements. So from the Mahabharata, it is very clear that whether it is the Kauravas or Pandavas, they all originated from the same dynasty, which was preceded by Bharat Maharaj. So there are descriptions from the scriptures saying that the name of Bharatavarsha also originated from the name of Bharat Maharaj. So apart from Bharat Maharaj, even the kings who came after him, they also expanded the empire of their dynasty, even until the time of Maharaj Pandu, the father of the Pandavas. So they already belong to a very glorious dynasty. It's just that due to the envious Kauravas, the Pandavas had to undergo so many difficulties in their life, but ultimately, due to the supreme will of the Supreme Lord, they were able to overcome all difficulties, and the demoniac Kauravas were all eliminated in the war. In a war which they themselves wanted so badly. It was the demoniac and foolish Duryodhana who actually wanted the war to happen at all costs. He even rejected the peace negotiation. So just like the foolish Ravana fan club members, they always tend to distort everything. So similarly, there are also many so-called atheists or rationalists who also claim to be intellectuals. So they often make this, they are always engaged in a smear campaign saying that Bhagavad Gita teaches about violence. The poor Kauravas were killed unfairly and all sorts of nonsense, but they will never be able to explain why this demoniac Duryodhana, who is so dear to their hearts, so why did he reject that peace offer? So these slaves who work according to the instructions of their foreign paymasters to be always engaged in this smear campaign against Sanatana Dharma. So they will always spread these malicious propaganda. But if we counter them with authentic points from authentic scriptures, they won't be able to answer anything. But they'll only end up labeling the other person or resort to their cancel culture. But the fact remains that these slaves are nothing but fools, because due to their lack of understanding of the authentic scriptures, and they all depend only on WhatsApp University. So they will never be able to explain why their dear most Duryodhana rejected the peace offer. So since he was unwilling to give even 5 villages to the Pandavas, so in the end he lost everything. But it was good that due to his foolishness, as there's also a saying, Vinashakali Viprit Buddhi, so his end was near. So he was behaving in the most foolish way. So he himself invited his death. So the demoniac Kauravas were all eliminated uh, as per the will of the Supreme Lord, and the administration was handed over to the pious Pandavas, and the Supreme Lord also made arrangements to make sure that the reign could continue after Maharaj Yudhishthira. Maharaj Parishit could actually take over. So mainly for that purpose, he was saved by the Supreme Lord. The forefathers of King Yudhishthira were all great saintly kings, pious and glorified by their great achievements. They were all saints on the royal throne. So this is actually the significance of the term Raja Rishis, the saintly kings. So this was also a very important criteria for the rulers in those ages compared to this degraded age of Kali. In the previous ages which were a lot better than this present age of Kali, the rulers were all saintly kings. However, at times the demoniac people took over, unfortunately. But as the Supreme Lord himself says in the Gita, chapter 4, 4.7 and 4.8, in 4.7 he says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanirvavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyam. Then in 4.8 he says, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya sadhushkritam dharma samsthapanataya sambhavami yuge yuge. So whenever these demoniac rulers take over and the pious people face a lot of difficulties. So in the case of the Pandavas also, due to the envious Duryodhana, they had to face a lot of difficulties. But the Supreme Lord, as he had already descended to the earth, he made sure that all these demoniac creatures were completely eliminated from the face of the earth, and the administration was handed over to the pious Pandavas. And especially in the case of Maharaj Yudhishthira, he was so virtuous that there are also descriptions about how he behaved even during the war, when the situation demanded for him to kind of act in a seemingly adharmic way. Still he tried his best to refrain. However, in order to eliminate the adharmic creatures, so the extreme measures were necessary. But by nature, the Pandavas were all extremely virtuous, and therefore they were qualified to be enthroned. So they could actually rule as saintly kings or the Raja Rishis, and therefore all the members of the state were happy, pious, well-behaved, prosperous, and spiritually enlightened. So uh, when the kings behave like true Raja Rishis and conduct their administration according to scriptural injunctions, so the entire administration will run smoothly, and the kingdom will also be prosperous. This we have already seen in chapter 10 of the first canto. In chapter 10, in the first few verses itself, in those verses, it is mentioned about how Maharaj Yudhishthira was enthroned as the ruler of Hastinapura after the war, and there are descriptions about how the uh, the kingdom was prospering, agriculture uh, was conducted smoothly, because in those yugas, in those glorious yugas, uh, people were all engaged in agriculture and also in uh, protecting the cows. So they had more than enough resources to lead their lives, unlike in this so-called modern developed age, where we create more problems than solutions in the name of development. But there was no such nonsense in the previous yugas. Uh, Srila Prabhupada himself has been emphasizing the point about how simply by having a, certain piece of land and some cows, any person can easily lead his life. It should be more than enough for any person to lead a decent life by having a piece of land and some cows. So in the previous yugas, the people were able to create so much wealth simply by being engaged in agriculture alone, and the agricultural sector itself, it depends on a lot of factors like the weather, the health of the cows, and all that. So in the first few verses of chapter 10 in this first canto, we saw descriptions about how once Maharaj Yudhishthira took over, since he was a saintly king, and him being enthroned, it was also due to the will of the Supreme Lord. So all the conditions were favorable. So the kingdom was being ruled, and every the people were all living prosperously under strict guidance of the great souls and spiritual injunctions. Such great saintly kings were trained up, and as a result, the kingdom was full of saintly persons and was a happy land of spiritual life. Maharaj Yudhishthira was himself a replica of his ancestors, and he desired that the next king after him become exactly like his great forefathers. So since the immediate successors like Abhimanyu and the sons of Draupadi were all killed during the war, only Maharaj Parikshit, who was the lone surviving heir apparent, only he could take over from Maharaj Yudhishthira, and therefore Maharaj Yudhishthira was especially concerned about whether Maharaj Parikshit will also grow up to be a great Kshatriya and a great saintly king, so that he would be qualified to take over the administration. So it is not like merely because someone is born in the royal family, he could automatically take over. There were also many considerations based on the ability of that person. So we also know that the father of the Pandavas, Maharaj Pandu, he actually took over, though he had an elder brother, but since that elder brother was not able to, he was not fit enough. Actually, it was not just because of his physical disability, but from the entire Mahabharata, we also know that he was not only physically disabled, but also due to his uh, lack of spiritual vision. So he was Dhritarashtra was actually unfit in every aspect, and therefore Maharaj Pandu was the one who was seen as the able king. So even in this case, Maharaj Yudhishthira was also very concerned about how whether Maharaj Parishit would grow up to be a person who would really be qualified to take over the administration from him. Maharaj Yudhishthira was himself a replica of his ancestors, and he desired that the next king after him become exactly like his great forefathers. He was happy to learn from the learned Brahmanas that by astrological calculations, the child would be born a first-grade devotee of the Lord. And more confidentially, he wanted to know whether the child was going to follow in the footsteps of his great forefathers. That is the way of the monarchical state. So in the previous few verses, like especially in verse 17, we saw the description about the descriptions by the Brahmanas about how Maharaj Parishit would grow up to be a great devotee. So that is just one aspect. But Maharaj Yudhishthira was he also wanted to know whether Maharaj Parishit would grow up to be qualified enough to take over the administration. So the ancestors in the royal family, they were also concerned about the individual ability of their descendants before actually handing over the administration to them. So the monarchical state in the previous yugas was much better compared to the current system, which is neither democratic nor monarchical, but it's messed up in every way. The most interesting example would be in the case of Tamil Nadu at present, especially in the previous yugas, the royal families, they were all concerned about the heir apparent being they were always concerned, and they made sure that the heir apparent would grow up to be really qualified to take over the administration from the ancestors. And therefore, all the children in the royal family, they were always trained under the strict guidance of the Rajgurus. Even in the case of the Pandavas, they were all sent to be trained under Dronacharya since childhood, and there was this proper system to really choose the most qualified candidate out of the possible successors. So it was not a given that just because someone is born in a royal family, that person cannot simply take over. But the ancestors were always concerned about the individual abilities of the possible successors. So that monarchical state was much better than compared to this present state in this Kali Yuga, which is neither monarchical and it cannot even be considered democratic. And this messed up condition, it can be seen in the case of Tamil Nadu at present, because though it appears like there is a democratic system based on the Constitution of India, but even that is very sometimes it appears to be very amusing, especially with the current uh, opposition parties in India. They always preach about democracy and constitutional values only when it is favorable to them, especially when it comes to elections. So in India, the first election which was conducted fully using the electronic voting machine was in 2004. So this development of EVMs, it was always conducted in a phased manner. So in 2004, actually, all the polls were conducted using EVMs, and that was the time when the BJP lost heavily, and the Congress party took over in the central government, and the most disastrous decade in the history of independent India followed for 10 years from 2004 to 2014. So during that time, in those two general elections, they won when the EVMs were being used. So when they were winning, they had no problem with the election verdict. But as soon as the 2014 results were declared, all of a sudden, these people, these great um, followers of the so-called Mahatma, they all started to have problems with the EVM. So every time these losers, they always had to find some excuse. So whenever they lost, they started blaming the EVMs. And then, but in some cases, just like in 2018, in December 2018, in some states, the ruling BJP had to face defeats in some of the states in December 2018. At that time, when the Congress party won, they were okay with the EVMs, but in December last year, when the results were announced for the same states, the people were at least intelligent enough to know that they wasted their mandate in 2018. So the people were smart enough to know that this Congress party is the most incorrigible party. So they voted again for the BJP. And as soon as they voted, as soon as the results were declared, then all the people were, the losers started to blame the people. They started to blame the same voters who made them win in 2018. So this blaming the voters, blaming the EVM, all these amusing things always keep happening whenever these losers can't face the defeat. So they do all this. And in the case of Tamil Nadu especially, it's even more interesting because the DMK especially, which is also an ally of the Congress party, they have always been blaming the electronic voting machines since 2014 especially. So even for them, since they were not, they also were not able to rule the state government since 2011. Of course, even the people of Tamil Nadu are so smart to make a disastrous choice like what they did in 2021. The irony is that the current chief minister of Tamil Nadu, he was not even preferred by his own father. When his father was alive, of course, it is an open secret that that family is the dynasty, the epitome of dynastic politics in this Kali Yuga, there's no other benchmark which could defeat this disastrous dynasty of DMK. But ironically, even the father of MK Stalin was very reluctant to hand over the party to him when he was alive. It was only after his demise in 2018 that MK Stalin took over. So it is an open secret that that so-called party itself is being run by just one family. So from the outside, it appears as though there is a democratic setup, but in reality, only the dynasty of this one family controls the entire party. And since the people of Tamil Nadu are so smart, so they themselves made their choice in 2021, and until now they are reaping the benefits of what they had sowed. So such is the state of this Kali Yuga, where neither the people are truly in power, and even the so-called administrators, they themselves are not really qualified to rule the people. And that's why, compared to the previous yugas, in this Kali Yuga, there are so many nations within this planet, which is part of Jambudvipa, because in the previous chapters, we have seen descriptions about how whether it was Maharaj Yudhishthira or Maharaj Parikshit, they were all able to expand the empire of Hastinapura to cover the entire Jambudvipa. So Jambudvipa is actually one of the 7 Shaptadvipas, and the one who actually is able to rule Jambudvipa, it is like he is in control not just of Bharatavarsha, but also the 9 Varshas in Jambudvipa. So in those, in the previous yugas, even until the dawn of Kali Yuga, the saintly kings were able administrators who could rule to such an extent. So even when Maharaj Parikshit left, the extent of his of the empire, it covered the entire Jambudvipa, the 9 Varshas, not just Bharatavarsha. But today, as we can clearly see, so many states are breaking up, so many new states, so many new countries are being created, mainly because none of the so-called administrators in Kali Yuga are fit to rule, because they lack all the important criteria, especially as mentioned in the scriptures, like in the case of Maharaj Parikshit himself, his ancestors, they were so concerned about how he's going to grow up, whether he'll have the proper qualifications or not. So all these considerations were there. So it was not merely a given that someone who was born in a royal family can automatically rule. So the monarchical state in the previous yugas were much better than the so-called democratic setup that we have in this degraded Kali Yuga. The reigning king should be a pious, chivalrous devotee of the Lord and fear personified for the upstarts. So this description, it covers the spiritual aspect of the king and also his personal traits, which would enable him to rule the kingdom. He must also live an heir apparent, equally qualified to rule over the innocent citizens. So this is also another important responsibility of the king who was ruling in the previous yugas. So since Maharaj Yudhishthira was enthroned as the ruler of Hastinapura after the war, so he was also very concerned about the future predictions related to Maharaj Parikshit, because it was also his duty to ensure that there would be an heir apparent to take over the administration from him. He must also leave an heir apparent equally qualified to rule over the innocent citizens. In the modern setup of the democratic states, the people themselves are fallen to the qualities of the Shudras or less, and the government is run by their representative who is ignorant of the scriptural mode of administrative education. So, in this purport, the descriptions are specifically related to the Kshatriya Varna, about how in the previous yugas, the Kshatriyas were qualified enough to rule over vast extent of land. So even even during the time of Maharaj Parikshit, he was able to rule the entire Jambudvipa, which covered the 9 Varshas. But today, even today, there are close to 200 countries, and more countries are starting to break up. There is political instability in so many countries. This is mainly due to the fact that the so-called administrative class in all the different countries, they lack the qualification which was possessed by the great saintly kings in the previous yugas. So these differences are very clear, and as Kali Yuga advances, things are only likely to get from bad to worse. So when we talk about the Kshatriyas, regarding the word Kshatriya itself, can anyone tell what is the meaning of Kshatriya? The meaning of the word Kshatriya?
To protect you from getting hurt.
Yeah, the meaning, Prabhu, like the meaning of the syllables.
Shat
Yeah.
is injury.
Yeah.
Triya to save you from it.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Nice.
Yeah.
So a Kshatriya is the one who protects people from danger. So as Prabhu just mentioned, Shat refers to injury or danger. Traya is the one who liberates people, who protects them from danger. So this was the most important quality of a Kshatriya. And therefore, the king who was supposed to rule the entire kingdom, he had to really set a huge benchmark. So all the kings who were ruling, they were also interested to know whether the possible successor would be able to further set a higher benchmark than they themselves. So regarding the Kshatriya Varna, as we know, the Supreme Lord himself has mentioned in the Gita about the Varna system. Though this Varna system remains to be the most favorite target of the the those who spread malicious propaganda, they always target the Varnashrama system. But it is clearly mentioned by the Supreme Lord in the Gita about the basis for the Varna system. So which verse in the Gita talks about the Varna system? In the Gita, the Supreme Lord himself describes about the Varna system in one of the chapters. Actually, in 2 chapters, he talks about it. So the first chapter is in the first chapter which talks about the Varna system is in 4.13. So the Supreme Lord provides this initial description about the Varna system. In 4.13, the Supreme Lord says, Chaturvanya Maya system, Guna Karma Vibhagasa, Tasya Kartaram Vipam, Vidya Kartaram Avyayam. According to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So the basic criteria for the Varna system is based on the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them. Guna, Karma, Vivagasa. So this is especially a very important sloka, which destroys all the smear campaign by those who have vested interest it can be clearly seen that Srila Prabhupada has provided, just like many other verses, he has provided the word by word meaning, and from the original shloka itself, we can clearly see where it's mentioned Guna Karma Vibhagasa. So the Supreme Lord says that the division of the Varnas is based on gunas and karmas. Though a lot of slaves who work for the interests of their foreign paymasters, they continue this smear campaign against Sanatana Dharma, saying that there is division based on birth, and unfortunately, the vast majority of Hindus, since they do not know the authentic version of the scriptures, since they do not sometimes even when we go for book distribution, it is ironic that people do not prefer to read from authentic sources, but they only depend on WhatsApp University so much. But if we study from the authentic versions, we can clearly see that the Supreme Lord himself says that the basic criteria for the Varna system is based on gunas and karmas. So even in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains about how the gunas are associated to each Varna. So we know that there are three main gunas, the three modes of material nature. So beginning from the intelligent class of man, the Brahmanas, they are associated to the mode of goodness. Next is the administrative class, called the Kshatriyas, due to them being situated in the mode of passion. The mercantile men, called the Vaishyas, are situated in the mixed modes of passion and ignorance, and the Shudras, or laborer class, are situated in the ignorant mode of material nature. So, by default, the division of the Varnas are all based on the gunas of an individual. It has got nothing to do with birth. So even in this Kali Yuga, we can clearly see many people who claim to be Brahmanas. They call themselves Brahmanas simply because they were born in a Brahmana family. But their behavior, it is often very clear that they behave in such a way that it is actually worse than the lowest of Shudras. So despite being born in a Brahmana family, one need not necessarily be a Brahmana. But the smear campaign against Sanatana Dharma is always targeted at this Varna system, and many fools, they propagate this myth that the Varnas are based on birth, whether it is due to their ignorance or whether they do it on purpose. So it is mainly done with due to their vested interest. But the saddest part is that many Hindus who do not have access to the authentic scriptures, or that there's also another problem, though we offer them authentic sources like the Bhagavad Gita as it is, they still prefer to only believe what they see on WhatsApp University. So without having this proper knowledge, when the anti-Hindu forces, when they engage in their smear campaign, especially I also saw one profile on this Quora platform. There are a lot of retards who often engage in their smear campaign. They create profiles to in an effort to continue their smear campaign against Sanatana Dharma. Even in their profile, they kind of proudly mention as they identify themselves as anti-Sanatani force or something, but they only end up exposing their ignorance. What they do is they copy and paste a lot of garbage from websites like sacredtext.com. There's this website called sacredtext.com. So in that website, there are collections of translations from many religious scriptures. But if we click on the links of the Puranas and they call it the Puranas and the Vedas, but most of these translations were all compiled by idiots, especially from the time when the British were ruling India. So those idiots who did not have any proper religious education, none of them were initiated by a bona fide parampara. So these idiots came up with all sorts of garbage translations. As a result, many people who were supposed to be scholars, they also ended up having a completely flawed and distorted understanding about the Hindu scriptures. One example, as we have seen from our thematic studies, was B.R. Ambedkar. So though he was supposed to be a well-educated person, a so-called scholar, but we saw just how disastrous was his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. So a lot of people, when they do not have access to the authentic version of the scriptures, when they do not know the meaning of the shloka word by word, then they end up believing whatever garbage that was written by the British stooges. So especially in this website, sacredtext.com, I could see that only translations were provided. So even I can come up with my own translations about scriptures in the other religions. So I can also write all sorts of garbage about other religions. But it is not fair. Someone who is truly a scholar should study the original verses and then provide the translation. So these the British stooges in the past, they were never qualified enough to get initiated to any bona fide parampara. So they came up with all their garbage translations, and many of these so-called anti-Sanatani forces on platforms like Quora and many other social media platforms, though they proudly claim to be rationalists, they only end up exposing their ignorance, because it is very easy to detect the source, because what they do, they simply copy and paste from all sorts of garbage websites like sacredtext.com, because from what I observed in that website, I could not see any of the original shlokas. So only the translations are provided. So it simply means that those fools who came up with those translations, they did not have any proper initiation, or they did not have any association with any bona fide parampara. Unlike in our case, Srila Prabhupada himself belonging to a bona fide parampara, he got the proper knowledge, and he was also qualified in Sanskrit. So he has provided word by word meaning. So this translation, which is provided here, it is not merely out of his own whims. He has shown how this full translation is derived from the word by word meaning. But it's not surprising that the so-called anti-Sanatani warriors, as they call themselves, so those fools, they copy and paste from all sorts of garbage websites, and they only end up exposing their ignorance. But the most unfortunate thing is that many Hindus who do not study the authentic scriptures like Bhagavad Gita as it is, even in the case of Bhagavad Gita, there are so many editions available, but not all editions provide complete translations like this. So not just in Bhagavad Gita as it is, in almost all of Srila Prabhupada's major works, he has followed this format of providing the word by word meanings, and the full translation is derived from the word by word meanings. So it is extremely unfortunate that most Hindus who do not study these authentic scriptures, they also fall prey to this smear campaign by the stooges of the anti-Hindu forces, but it is very easy to counter those fools because since they expose their ignorance on public platforms, whenever they are countered with valid points, they are not able to answer, so they simply run away. Anyways, it is fun to expose them, just like in the case of B.R. Ambedkar and also this manufactured Mahatma. He also provided his garbage translation and interpretation of the Gita. So it is very easy to expose these fools when we have access to the authentic versions of the scriptures. So especially in the case of a Kshatriya, the Varnas have got nothing to do with birth. Even for a Kshatriya who is born in a royal family, he is also evaluated based on his individual gunas and karmas. As mentioned here, the Kshatriyas are by default they are associated with the mode of passion, and the Brahmanas are associated with the mode of goodness. However, there's no such thing as a top or bottom hierarchy here, because all these three modes, they are merely modes of material nature. They are still considered as modes of material nature, as we can also see from chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita. It is clearly mentioned that even for the Brahmanas, who by default, they are in the mode of goodness, but still the main point which we have to know from chapter 14 is that even goodness is not good enough. Even those Brahmanas who remain in fully in the mode of goodness, the maximum benefit which they can get is to elevate themselves to the higher planets like Swargaloka. But that is not considered liberation, because in verse 14.26 especially, the Supreme Lord says, one who is engaged in devotional service will be able to transcend all three modes. So by default, all the conditioned souls are born with these particular tendencies. So it is all different according to the individuals. Just because someone is born in a certain family, that does not really determine his gunas and his the karma in which he is likely to be engaged. So even for a Brahmana who may be by default associated with the mode of goodness, still that does not make him qualified for liberation. It is important to transcend all these three modes. All the three modes are equally binding. Even for someone who is in the mode of goodness, if he remains fully in the mode of goodness, he can only elevate himself to the higher planets still within this material universe. So that cannot be considered as liberation, because even that has been explained by the Supreme Lord in chapter 9 about what happens to those who go to Swargaloka. So the Kshatriyas are by default associated with the mode of passion, and the qualities for each of these varnas are also explained by the Supreme Lord in chapter 18. So in chapter 18, starting from verse 40 onwards, there is the description about how every varna is related to certain qualities. So from 18.40 onwards, the descriptions are given. 18.41, Brahmana Kshatriya Vaishyam Sudranam Cha Parantapa Karmani Pravibhaktani Swabhava Prabhavir Gunai. Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras are distinguished by the qualities born of their own natures in accordance with the material modes. So it has got nothing to do with the family in which they are born. Even in this Kali Yuga, we can clearly see many people who claim to be Brahmanas simply because they are born in a Brahmana family. They end up behaving worse than the lowest of Shudras. So it is all based on the individual traits. 18.42, the qualities of a Brahmana are mentioned. Samo damas tapas saucham, shanti rajam evacha, jnana vinyana mastikyam, brahma karma subhavajam. Peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. So only someone who has these qualities is regarded as a Brahmana. The Supreme Lord himself mentions this in the Gita. He does not say that someone who is born in a Brahmana family is regarded as a Brahmana. A Brahmana is someone who has these qualities. But in Kali Yuga, we can clearly see many people who claim to be Brahmanas just because they were born in a Brahmana family, they have the exact opposite qualities to what is being mentioned here. 18.43 Shauryam Tejo Dhritidaksham Yuddhe Chapya Palayanam Dhanam Ishvara Bhavascha Shatram Karma Svavajam. Heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership are the natural qualities of work for the Kshatriyas. So a Kshatriya should ideally be equipped with these qualities, these specific qualities. But in Kali Yuga, we can see that since many countries, they have adopted either democracy or autocracy, and in some confused countries, they adopt both, and the so-called Kshatriyas in such countries, they often use their weapons only for photo shoots. So these are the specific qualities which should preferably be there in the Kshatriyas, especially the king, who is supposed to set the benchmark for ruling the kingdom. But even in Kali Yuga, we can see that the so-called administrators or the ruling class, they have the exact opposite qualities compared to what is mentioned here. And in 18.44, the qualities of work related to the Vaishya and Shudra Varnas are mentioned. Krishi Goraksha Vanigyam, Vaishya Karma Svavajam, Paricharyatmakam Karma, Shudra Shapi Svavajam. Farming, cow protection, and business are the natural work for the Vaishyas, and for the Shudras, there are labor and service to others. So from the Bhagavad Gita, if we look at the exact words spoken by the Supreme Lord, it is clear that the Varna has got nothing to do with birth. It is based on the individual traits of every person. Just because someone is born in a Brahmana family, that does not guarantee that that person will also die as a Brahmana. He could even be worse than a Brahmana. Apart from many examples which we can see in Kali Yuga, there are also examples from the Puranas. In Bhagavata Purana also, there's one example. Can anyone specify? One example, he was born as a Brahmana, but he somehow ended up being like worse than a Shudra in his life. Can anyone specify that example? It's there in Bhagavatam.
Jamila,
Yes, correct. So, not just in Kali Yuga, even in the previous Yugas, it was clear that it is the individual qualities of a person which determine his Varna. So, even in the case of Ajamila, he was born in a Brahmana family, he was brought up well, but due to his own tendency, due to his bewilderment by Maya, he ended up being worse than a Shudra. So it is only the individual traits. As the Supreme Lord himself mentions, the Varna has got nothing to do with birth. But those who are engaged in smear campaign to satisfy their paymasters, so they will only continue doing what they do. But for those who have knowledge from the authentic version of the scriptures, so if we are equipped with the authentic knowledge, we can easily counter those slaves. So those fools, when they are faced with authentic facts, they simply run away. And the funniest part is that they actually do it on public platforms. So when they are countered, they are forced to run away. That's all. And particularly, we can also see from the Bhagavad Gita itself, the Supreme Lord also emphasizes a lot regarding the Kshatriya Dharma, because as we know from the beginning, from the first chapter itself, Arjuna was confused about his Dharma, and that is actually what led to the entire discourse of the Gita. So in chapter 2, first the Supreme Lord starts by explaining about the distinction between the material body and the spirit soul, and then in the second part, from verse 11 until verse 30, he talks about the distinction between the spirit soul and the material body. Then starting from verse 31 onwards, he talks about the importance of a Kshatriya to do his duty. First, in the first verse, from which the actual discourse starts, the Supreme Lord actually starts to impart the teachings of the Gita in 2.11. So from 2.11 to 2.30, the Supreme Lord actually provides descriptions about the distinction between the spirit soul and the material body. Then starting from 31 onwards, he is emphasizing about the importance of Arjuna doing his duty as a Kshatriya. So in 2.31, the Supreme Lord says, considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there is no need for hesitation. So starting from this verse onwards, it is very clear that the Supreme Lord is only asking Arjuna to do his duty. So though this looks like a message that is meant for Arjuna, especially with the reference to the Kshatriya Varna, it is also the message for us about the importance of being engaged in our own duty. But those fools who engage in their anti-Sanatana Dharma smear campaign, those fools, they often say that Lord Krishna talks about violence. He encourages violence in the Bhagavad Gita. But from this verse itself, in chapter 2 itself, we can clearly see that the Supreme Lord is emphasizing about the importance for Arjuna to be engaged in his duty. Arjuna was basically a warrior. He belonged to the Kshatriya Varna. So it was important for him to do his duty without hesitating. So that was the most important point. After describing the distinction between spirit, soul, and material body, the Supreme Lord emphasizes on this aspect about how a Kshatriya should do his duty. Not just for Kshatriya, all the Varnas are engaged in they have their basic duties which they have to perform. So that is the main message here about how we should be engaged in our own duty. So even before the teachings of the Gita were imparted, Arjuna was a Kshatriya. So it was not like the Supreme Lord wanted him to kill only during the battle of Kurukshetra. So many idiots who propagate this malicious propaganda saying that Lord Krishna encouraged Arjuna to kill, those fools do not realize that the emphasis here is about doing one's duty. In the case of Arjuna, he was a Kshatriya, but it was since he was hesitating to do his duty, the Supreme Lord imparted the teachings of the Gita also to make him understand about the importance of doing his duty. And there are also further explanation provided by the Supreme Lord, like in 2.32, he says, O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of their heavenly planets. If, however, you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death. The great generals who have highly esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out of fear only, and thus they will consider you insignificant. Your enemies will describe you in many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you? O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up with determination and fight. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting, without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing, you shall never incur sin. So the main emphasis here is for Arjuna to do his duty as a Kshatriya. But the message is also similar to us. The emphasis is on doing our duty according to our own varna. So, despite this detailed explanation provided by the Supreme Lord in so many verses, still those who are answerable to their foreign paymasters, they will always be engaged in their smear campaign. But since they are doing it on a public platform, so they will only end up exposing their own ignorance. And for those who have knowledge from the authentic sources, we can always counter those fools. So apart from this, we also know that in chapter 1, Arjuna spoke about how killing the Kauravas would lead to the degradation of their dynasty, about how the children about how there will be unwanted population, about Varna Shankara. But the Supreme Lord, he also counters the points mentioned by Arjuna in chapter 3 also. In 3.21, he says, Yajajasarati Stresha Tatta Deve Tarojana Sayat Pramanam Kurti Lokas Tat Anuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So this is especially important for the Kshatriyas, or those who are engaged in administration, the ruling class. But since in Kali Yuga, the so-called academic institutions, they propagate nothing which is ideal for spiritual development. So the so-called ruling class in this Kali Yuga ends up being worse than the Shudras. Then in 3.22, he says, O son Pruta, there's no work prescribed for me within all the 3 planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything, and yet I'm engaged in prescribed duties. So in the Bhagavatam, there are also descriptions about Lord Krishna's daily routine. When he himself was ruling Dwaraka, so there are also descriptions about how he followed a strict routine as the ruler. So he's also emphasizing about why it is particularly important for a Kshatriya to behave in a certain way, because he has to set an example to the general public. So it is also mentioned in the purport about how the Supreme Lord was convincing Arjuna about the importance of being engaged in doing his own duty. So the message is very clear. It is the main emphasis in the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the context of the battle, was mainly meant to inform Arjuna about the importance for him to be engaged in doing his duty. But since many people have their own vested interests, so they only end up in doing their smear campaign. Also in 3.23, the Supreme Lord says, for if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. Then in 3.24, in this verse particularly, he counters the point that was mentioned by Arjuna in the first chapter. In 3.24, he says, if I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination, I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. In the first chapter, Arjuna was talking about Varna Shankara, the unwanted population. So he was saying that if he kills the Kauravas, then that would cause unwanted population. But here, Lord Krishna is countering Arjuna's point by saying that if a Kshatriya is not engaged in his business of protecting the people, if a Kshatriya does not kill the miscreants, then that would actually create unwanted population. So from all these descriptions, it is very clear that the Supreme Lord was only telling Arjuna to do his duty. But still, those fools who have to answer their foreign paymasters, they will always be engaged in their smear campaign. Also, if we look at the case of Lord Rama, he was also a Kshatriya, and even when he was sent to exile, he still took his weapons with him, because he was, even in exile, he was engaged in his duty as a Kshatriya. But ironically, in the same land where Ramayana and Mahabharata happened, the people of that glorious land, they actually believe that they got their freedom in 1947 without weapons. So that is the biggest irony of this wonderful land. The Supreme Lord himself, he has made it very clear that the purpose for which he descends to the material world is to protect the pious and annihilate the miscreants. And not just the Supreme Lord, even all the demigods, they are equipped with their weapons. But the biggest irony is that the vast majority in the Hindu community, they actually believe that India got its freedom through non-violence, through a struggle without weapons. But many enlightened people, even during that time, even in the 50s and 60s, right after independence, there were always efforts by the slaves of the British, even in independent India, because the first prime minister of independent India, who entered through the back door, thanks to that so-called Mahatma, he himself was the biggest slave of the British. So he was the one who propagated this myth that India got independence without using any weapons. But the truth is that India only got independence due to the efforts of Netaji. Coincidentally, today is also his birthday, 23rd January. So he is the true liberator of India. He was also a very ardent reader of the Bhagavad Gita. So he was the one who played a very important role to ensure that the British left India. And even to dilute this, many people also knew this truth from that time itself. But to dilute this truth, many of the court historians or distortions, they have been propagating, they have been saying that the British had actually won the war, so they were able to subdue the Indian National Army, which was under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose. So they always use this point that the British actually won the war, won the Second World War. So they were able to subdue the INA. But what they fail to explain is why the so-called winners of the Second World War, why though they were victorious, why they had to run away from India so soon after the war. That they will not be able to explain. But the truth remains that only due to the efforts of Netaji, through a violent struggle, due to the sacrifices of the soldiers of INA, it was only due to their efforts that India got its freedom, not because of some manufactured Mahatma. So, whether it is from the Bhagavad Gita or whether it is from the real history of Indian independence, the fact remains that violence was required whenever it was really necessary. So, even through the efforts of Netaji, he reawakened the Kshatriya spirit among Indians, especially through his INA. So, even after the so-called defeat of the INA, the people were also awakened when they saw this, especially this Red Fort trial. They were also completely awakened, and that is what actually led to the British running away from India. Though the court historians, they say that the British won the World War, they were able to subdue the INA. So the irony is that the so-called victorious people, still they had to run away. So this, the court historians would not be able to explain. But the fact remains that Netaji was the true liberator. He was also able to reawaken the Kshatriya spirit. And from the example of the INA also, we can see that the Kshatriya spirit got reawakened. So everything depends on the individual ability of the person. So the Varna has got nothing to do with birth. And also, if we take the example of the so-called Gandhi-Nehru dynasty, so we can also see that though that person, that unelected person who entered through the back door to become the first prime minister, he was basically a fool, the biggest fool who occupied the position of the Prime Minister of India. So that actually led to the further degradation of India, since there was no credible opposition. So people were forced to vote for this Congress party. But now it is become very clear that the offsprings in that dynasty, they are accelerating the demise of that party, because since their ancestors were fools, so they tend to have this sense of entitlement, despite having despite their lack of credibility and their own individual competency. They only have their sense of entitlement, since they think that they belong to a great dynasty. However, whether it is from the example which we saw from the Bhagavatam, even in the modern context, everything depends on the individual's ability. So the Varna system has got nothing to do with birth. Especially in the case of a Kshatriya, it is even more important. So as mentioned in this purport, the Kshatriyas are expected to have they were expected to have their own individual qualifications in the previous yugas. But in the modern age, in this so-called modern age, which is nothing but the most degraded age, the people who consist largely of the population of Shudras, they elect their own representatives. So this so-called democratic setup is actually a degradation compared to the monarchical setup which was there in the previous yugas. Thus, the whole atmosphere is surcharged with Shudra qualities manifested by lust and avarice. Such administrators quarrel every day among themselves. The cabinet of ministers changes often due to party and group selfishness. Everyone wants to exploit the state resources till he dies. No one retires from political life unless forced to do so. So this we can especially see from the example of one person who unfortunately was given the opportunity to rule Malaysia for so long. How can such low-grade men do good to the people? The result is corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. They should learn from the Srimad Bhagavatam how ideal the administrators must be before they can be given charge of different posts. So in the previous ages, in the monarchical setup in those days, even the heir apparent was evaluated based on his own individual qualities, but uh, due to lack of knowledge of the authentic scriptures, the current population, which largely consists of Shudras, not because of their birth, but because of their behavior, so they also end up electing those who are similar to them. So that is the irony of this Kali Yuga. So we'll continue verse 19 next week. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.